The whispers called her the porcelain doll, cracked and left on a high shelf to gather dust. Lady Seraphina of House Valerus had once been the province's brightest jewel, her laughter like wind chimes in the castle's summer gardens, her skill on horseback the envy of every lord and knight. But a single, slick patch of wet autumn leaves and the terrible, snapping sound of bone had shattered more than just her leg. It had shattered her worth. Now, she was defined not by her sharp mind or her noble blood, but by the ornate, silver-handled cane that was her constant companion and the graceless, dragging limp that followed her like a shadow. Her brother, Lord Valerus, had seen to that. He had orchestrated her fall from grace with the precision of a master puppeteer, transforming her from a beloved daughter into a symbol of tragic fragility, a broken thing best kept hidden away in the castle's northern wing. He called it protection. She knew it was a prison. The world she once commanded had shrunk to 3 rooms, their tapestried walls a silent testament to a life that was no longer hers. Despair was a cold, constant companion, its weight heavier than the stone walls that held her captive. That night, the autumn storm did not just rage against the castle, it clawed at the stones, a furious beast seeking entry. Rain lashed the leaded glass of her windows, and the wind howled through the crenellations with the grief of 1,000 lost souls. It was a sound that mirrored the tempest in her own heart. A sudden, frantic scraping sound from the balcony, distinct from the storm's chaos, startled her. It was the sound of desperation. Clutching her cane, Seraphina pulled herself from her chair, each step a carefully managed agony. She slid the heavy bolt and pushed the door open just enough to peer into the maelstrom. There, crouched against the balustrade, was a man. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes little more than rags, but it was not his own plight that contorted his face with a terror so profound it stole her breath. He was clutching a small, bundled shape to his chest, shielding it from the driving rain with his own body. He was a fugitive, that much was clear from the hunted look in his eyes, but in his arms, he held the entire world. He looked up, and his gaze met hers. There was no threat in his eyes, only a plea so raw and deep it bypassed all defenses. "My lady," he rasped, his voice nearly lost to the wind. "Forgive me. I seek nothing for myself. No coin, no food, no shelter. I will face the gallows if I must." He shifted slightly, revealing the pale, sleeping face of an infant within the folds of a warm wool blanket. "But he is innocent. His name is Liam. His mother is with the angels." The man's composure cracked, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "They hunt me for a crime I did not commit. They will not care that he is just a babe. Please, my lady. Hide him. Give him a chance. I ask for nothing more. I will disappear back into the storm, and you will never see me again." He was offering up his heart, his only reason for living, to a stranger. To her. A woman the world had deemed useless. In that moment, something within Seraphina shifted. For 2 years, she had been drowning in the sea of her own worthlessness, her horizons defined by her own pain. But looking at this desperate father and the precious life he protected, she felt a forgotten flicker of purpose. Here was a sorrow deeper than her own, a need more urgent than her own despair. It was a call to arms for a part of her soul she thought had long since died. She saw in his eyes not the deference of a commoner to a lady, but the recognition of one broken soul speaking to another. Without a word, she opened the door wider, her gesture a silent answer. The man, whose name she would later learn was Reese, looked at her with stunned, tear-filled gratitude. He hesitated for only a second before carefully, reverently, placing the sleeping bundle into her arms. The baby was impossibly light, yet he felt like an anchor, grounding her to the world in a way she hadn't felt since before her fall. Reese pressed his lips to his son's forehead, a final, heartbreaking farewell. "Be good, my son," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Then, with one last, grateful look at Seraphina, he vaulted back over the balustrade and vanished into the raging darkness. The balcony was empty. But her arms, and her life, were suddenly, terrifyingly full. The initial hours were a blur of clumsy, tender panic. Seraphina, with the help of her one remaining loyal servant, an elderly woman named Elspeth, fashioned a small cot from a laundry basket and her softest linens. The scent of rain-soaked wool and fresh linen filled her chambers, overriding the stale perfume of potpourri and sorrow. Liam, the infant, slept through it all, a small, perfect testament to the resilience of innocence. Seraphina found herself watching him breathe, the tiny rise and fall of his chest a more compelling rhythm than any courtly music. The next day, she learned the truth of Rhys's plight. Elspeth, her ears open to the castle's gossip, reported that a blacksmith from the Southern Valley, a man named Rhys, had been accused of treason, of forging weapons for rebels. His forge had been seized by a cousin of Lord Valeru's, a man known for his greed. Rhys had escaped capture, but his name was now a curse. Seraphina knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the charge was a lie, a convenient fiction to steal a man's livelihood. It was a cruelty born of the same casual ambition that had imprisoned her. Rhys had not vanished entirely. He was a ghost in the castle's forgotten places, a shadow in the overgrown gardens. He could not bring himself to leave, not completely. Driven by a desperate need to know his son was safe, he would leave small tokens on her balcony at night, a clutch of wild berries, a small, cleverly carved wooden bird. One evening, she found a small, intricate metal rose, its petals wrought with the skill of a master. It was then she knew. He was the blacksmith. He was not a traitor, he was an artist. Days turned into a week. Seraphina's life found a new, quiet rhythm. It revolved not around her pain, but around Liam's needs. She rediscovered her own mind, not as a vessel for courtly pleasantries, but as a tool. She read to the babe from her books of philosophy and history, her voice steady and calm. She managed the clandestine acquisition of goat's milk and clean swaddling, her strategic thinking, once praised in games of statecraft, now applied to the survival of one small child. For the first time in years, she felt not broken, but necessary. One night, as a sliver of moon cast pale light into her room, she found Rhys on her balcony again. He looked gaunt, but his eyes were fixed on the makeshift cot with a look of pure adoration. "He is well," she whispered, not wanting to startle him. Rhys turned, his shoulders slumping in relief. "Thank you, my lady." I had to see." She gestured for him to come inside, out of the cold. The act felt momentous, a crossing of a boundary far greater than the one between a balcony and a bedroom. It was the crossing of a boundary between two worlds. He spoke that night, his voice low and raspy, telling her of his wife, Ilara, who had died bringing Liam into the world. He spoke of his forge, of the fire and the steel, of the pride he took in creation, not destruction. His grief was a raw, open thing, yet there was no self-pity in it, only a profound and gentle sorrow. Listening to him, Seraphina felt her own defenses crumble. She found herself speaking of the life she had lost, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, aching nostalgia. She spoke of the freedom of a gallop, the wind in her hair, the feeling of being one with a powerful beast. She spoke of how the silence of these rooms was louder than any scream. In that shared darkness, illuminated only by a single candle, they were not a lady and a fugitive. They were simply two people marked by loss, finding a fragile solace in the presence of another's pain. He noticed the way she leaned heavily on her cane, the subtle wince with each movement. He saw the intricate leg brace she wore beneath her gown, a device of leather and steel that was more a torment than a help. The next night, he brought his tools, salvaged from who knew where. "If I may, my lady," he said softly, his gaze respectful. "I am a worker of metal. This is a poor design. It fights you. It should help you." Hesitantly, she allowed it. He worked by candlelight, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he reshaped the metal, softened the leather, and adjusted the fittings. It was an act of service so profound and intimate it left her breathless. When he was done, and she put it on, the relief was immediate. The brace no longer chafed and bit, it supported. For the first time, a step was not a negotiation with agony. The tears that welled in her eyes were not of sorrow, but of a gratitude so immense it felt like hope. Their fragile sanctuary could not last. Her brother, Valerus, was no fool. He noticed the change in her. The deep, dark circles under her eyes had faded, replaced by a quiet alertness. The air of listless despair had been replaced by a subtle, determined energy. He grew suspicious. His visits became more frequent, his eyes sweeping her chambers, searching for the source of this transformation. He would ask pointed questions, his voice a silken threat. "You seem improved, sister. Has some miracle occurred?" She would meet his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs, and give him calm, empty answers that only fueled his paranoia. The castle felt like a tightening net. Guards patrolled the gardens more frequently. Elspeth brought word that Valerus was offering a handsome reward for any information on the fugitive blacksmith. The crisis came on a moonless night. A patrol, earlier than usual, swept through the gardens below. Rhys, who had been in her rooms helping to soothe a fussing Liam, had no time to retreat to the balcony. Serafina acted on pure instinct, pushing him into the deep shadows of an alcove behind a heavy tapestry, just as the heavy thud of the guard's footsteps sounded in the corridor. She stood, her body shielding the alcove, her hand gripping her cane, her heart a frantic drum. Liam, in his cot, let out a small cry. Valerus himself threw open the door without knocking. His eyes, cold and shrewd, scanned the room, lingering on her pale face, on the cot. "What is the meaning of this noise?" he demanded. "A stray cat, brother," she said, her voice impossibly steady. "It must have found its way in during the storm." Valerus smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. He walked slowly toward the cot. "A cat? Let me see this remarkable creature." He reached for the blanket. In that moment, Serafina thought it was all over. But from behind the tapestry, a low, almost imperceptible growl emanated. It was Rhys, ready to sacrifice himself to protect his son. The sound was just enough. Valerus paused, his hand hovering. He mistook it for the sound she had described. A flicker of distaste crossed his face. "See that you get rid of it," he sneered. "I will not have vermin in this wing." He turned and left, the slam of the door echoing like a death knell. Serafina sagged against the wall, trembling. Rhys stepped out from the shadows, his face a mask of fury and fear. They stood in the charged silence, their shared terror a palpable thing. He reached out, not touching her, but his hand hovered near her arm, a gesture of solidarity, of protection. The unspoken emotion that had been growing between them for weeks, a fragile seedling of respect and empathy, suddenly blossomed in the barren soil of their desperation into something undeniable. They were trapped. Valerus's suspicions were now a certainty. It was only a matter of time before he found proof. That night, as Liam slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around him, they sat together in the near darkness. The pretense of their stations was gone, stripped away by the imminent threat. "He will find you," Serafina whispered, her voice tight with fear. "He will hang you, and he will." "I don't know what he will do with Liam." Rhys looked at her, his gaze intense. "Then I will run. I will take him and we will disappear." "He will hunt you to the ends of the earth," she countered, her voice breaking. "There is nowhere you can go." Despair, cold and familiar, settled over them. They were facing total ruin. In this crucible of fear, all artifice was burned away, leaving only the raw, shining truth. "I cannot lose him, Serafina," Rhys said, his voice cracking as he used her name for the first time. "He is all I have." She looked from the sleeping child to the face of this honorable, broken man who had mended her brace, who had shown her more kindness in a few weeks than her own family had in a lifetime. "He is not all you have," she whispered, the words a confession that stunned them both. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the broken lady, but the fierce, intelligent woman who had saved his son. He saw her strength, her resilience, the profound beauty in her spirit that no physical ailment could ever mar. "And he said, his voice thick with an emotion he had thought long dead, "I will not leave you to face him alone. I would rather face the gallows." It was not a grand declaration in a sunlit garden. It was a vow made in shadow, a promise forged in desperation. It was a confession of love as a final act of rebellion against a world that had tried to crush them both. In that moment, a fire was lit in Serafina's mind. Love had not made her weak, it had made her a warrior. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She would not let Valerus win. She would not let him destroy this small, fragile family they had built in the ruins of their lives. "He thinks my mind is as broken as my leg," she said, a dangerous light in her eyes. "He has forgotten who I am. He has forgotten what I know." Before her fall, she had been her father's confidant. She had sat beside him, studying the estate ledgers, learning the intricate dance of alliances and debts. Valerus, in his arrogance, had assumed she had forgotten it all, that her mind was filled only with self-pity. He was wrong. She knew his secrets. She knew of the grain tithes he rerouted for his own profit, the funds for fortress repairs that had vanished into his personal coffers. She had the knowledge, but she needed proof. Their rebellion began in whispers. Serafina devised the plan, her mind sharp and precise. Rhys, using his ghostly knowledge of the castle's secret passages and forgotten corridors, became her agent. He moved through the walls like a phantom, observing, listening. Elspeth, their loyal ally, smuggled messages out of the castle, her sewing basket a vessel of clandestine communication. The recipient was Lord Greymaner, an old, honourable member of the Duke's Council, a man who had always been fond of Serafina and deeply distrustful of Valerus's ambition. Rhys's most dangerous mission was to the steward's office. Guided by Serafina's memory of its layout, he slipped in one night and retrieved the duplicate ledgers, the ones Valerus thought were hidden forever. He brought them to Serafina, the pages filled with her brother's elegant, damning script. The proof was in their hands. The final confrontation was not one of swords, but of ink and paper. Serafina, through Lord Greymaner, requested an audience with her father, the Duke, and the full council. She chose the setting herself, the great hall, the very room where her brother had so often displayed her as a pitiable wreck. When she entered, a hush fell over the assembled lords. She did not lean on her cane as a crutch, she held it as a scepter. Her steps, though uneven, were deliberate and firm, each one a reclamation of her dignity. Rhys's brace held true. Valerus stood beside their father, a smug, confident smile on his face, believing this was to be her final, public humiliation. "Sister," he began, his voice dripping with false concern. "This is unwell of you. You should be resting." Serafina met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not a cracked doll, but a queen. "I am perfectly well, brother," she said, her voice ringing with newfound power. "I am here to speak of the stewardship of this domain. Specifically, of the massive thefts that have been funding your private ambitions at the expense of your people." Valerus's face went white. Lord Greymaner stepped forward and presented the ledgers. The evidence was irrefutable, her brother's own handwriting a testament to his greed and treason. The Duke, her father, who had been content to believe his son's lies and ignore his daughter's suffering, looked as though he had been struck. He saw not only his son's treachery, but his own profound failure. Valerus, cornered and exposed, was stripped of his titles and exiled, his name now a synonym for disgrace. He was left with nothing but his own ambition, which had become a poison that had consumed him from within. He had become a mirror of the brokenness he had tried to project onto her. In the aftermath, the world rushed back in, offering Serafina everything she had lost: status, power, admiration. But she wanted none of it. She had found her kingdom not in the cold stone of the castle, but in the warmth of a humble blacksmith's love and the fierce protectiveness she felt for his child. She petitioned her father for one thing only, a full pardon and the restoration of all lands and titles to Rhys of the Southern Valley. Then she did something that stunned the entire court. In a formal decree, she, Lady Serafina, a woman of noble blood, legally adopted the common-born son of a blacksmith. She named Liam her sole heir. It was an act that shattered centuries of tradition, a testament to the fact that true nobility was not a matter of birth, but of the heart. They did not stay in the castle. They chose a life away from the whispers and the intrigue, taking up residence in a modest manor near the newly restored forge. The ringing of Rhys's hammer on steel became the music of their new life, a sound of creation and strength. The house filled not with servants, but with the scent of baking bread and the quiet hum of a family healing. Their home became a symbol of their own happiness, a kingdom built on a foundation of kindness, respect, and courage. One sun-drenched afternoon, as Serafina sat in the garden reading and Rhys worked at a nearby bench, mending a toy, a small miracle unfolded. Liam, who had just learned to stand, took a wobbling, uncertain step away from a chair. Then another. He walked, unsteadily, across the small patch of grass that separated them, his arms outstretched. He stopped right between them, looked up at Serafina with his father's earnest eyes, and spoke his first clear word. "Mama." Then he turned to Rhys, his face breaking into a radiant smile. "Papa." In that single, perfect moment, 3 broken souls became whole. The past was not erased, but its wounds had finally healed, transformed into scars that told a story not of pain, but of a love that had defied a kingdom and built a new one in its place. True worth, they had discovered, is not something you are born with or have bestowed upon you by rank or title. It is something you forge in the fires of adversity, something you build in the shelter of love, and something you claim when you finally realize that the only crown that matters is the one you place upon your own head.